Hello and welcome to Killer Off-Road Hobbies. I'm your host Gary, and we're doing a full review and my thoughts video today, and that is going to be on none other than the Traxxas UDR Ultimate Desert Racer. This is a 1/7 scale Baja style truck. Very scale look on this truck. I have beat it up pretty good, but look at all these scale accessories. The ESCs tucked down in there. This does run the Valenion 6S VXL system with a 2200 kV motor and a 6S capable ESC. Right here is what controls this bad boy, the good old TQI transmitter with the 50/50 70/30 split. You do have the multifunction and your steering trim over here. Nice foam on the wheel. Your menu settings up here on top, runs on 4 AA's, and yes, I like this transmitter. Alrighty, getting back to the truck, we'll turn it on its side so you can see the underneath. Lots of cool stuff under here. Nice tires, those are BFG K.O.R.H replicas. We got this nice solid axle here with a good old 4-link suspension. It is running 4 shocks in the front and 4 shocks in the rear. Very nice. The suspension on this thing, while being soft, is very workable. It does work very well. Nice steel drive shaft here. It did get pretty hot. That was actually kind of weird. This is how you open the battery tray. Now, it is a little inconvenient, I'm not gonna lie, but you put your pack and or packs in here. There's not a whole lot of room, so make sure your packs will fit. Moving to the front of the truck, as you can see, it's taken quite the beating at the rock quarry, but tons of travel out of this thing. I mean, this thing is just super scale. I am very impressed.
Alrighty, so let's get to my thoughts part of this. I have tested this thing pretty hard. I took it quite far beyond what it is basically marketed to do or supposed to do, especially when I took it to the rock quarry and I was, you know, doing huge jumps with this thing.
Yes!
Wasn't really designed for stuff like that, like small jumps, you know, tight trails, more like Baja style, trophy truck style stuff. So, I mean, I did push this thing very far beyond what I would consider it to be reasonable for it, and it took it very well, in my opinion. So let's go over a few pros and cons, and then I will give you my thoughts on this truck and whether I would recommend it or not. So I will start with the con. And one of the biggest cons about this truck is its tendency to roll over constantly. It really doesn't seem to matter what type of surface you're on, whether it be loose gravel, you know, a rocky type, loose dirt, grass especially, and I wouldn't even want to see this thing on asphalt or tarmac, whatever you want to call it, because this thing tends to roll over on any type of surface that I've had it on anyways, and yes, you will have to go fetch quite a bit. Now, a pro about this thing is it is extremely fun to drive outside of the rollover factor. Just the scaleness of it is very on par. I mean, this thing handles and maneuvers a lot like you would expect it to for what it looks like. I mean, if you've ever watched Baja races and stuff, when those things go over whoops and everything, I mean, the suspension's just moving a ton. They do tend to sit down low, but when they air out, the suspension drops out. I mean, it's super cool to see that in a 1/7 scale RC. I mean, they just nailed it with this thing as far as scale, appearance, and what you would expect it to perform like, other than the constant rollovers. Now, this is going to be kind of a pro and a con. This thing tends to crash like ridiculously bad off of stuff you wouldn't really expect it to. I mean, the crashes for this thing are just wild. I mean, you'll just kind of something that for like a monster truck or anything else would be like a little crash, maybe just a rollover or maybe a single endo or something. This thing will just run with it. It will just boom, 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 endo over endo over endo, and just wild, crazy, insane crashes. And the good thing is, this thing can take it. From my experience, the cage, the construction of the cage and the body itself and all the components on here, they have held up extremely well. For, like I said, this thing just tends to crash like crazy. Like, you would never expect to get such a wild crash out of a little slow speed like rollover. But slow speed rollover turns into it like flipping and cartwheeling and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I know it's not really a pro, but it is kind of fun to watch because you're like, oh my god, how did that happen? You know, how did it crash that bad out of that? So I'm going to give that a pro and a con because it's just wild what that does. So another pro we're going to go with is durability. This thing, from my experience, is extremely durable. Now, it does have a few flaws that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but for the most part, this thing has extremely good durability. Like I said, I have taken this thing beyond what I would consider to be even reasonable for this thing, and I only had one breakage, and I'll show you guys that breakage very, very shortly. So another con is this thing is pretty difficult to work on. Well, not so much difficult. It is pretty difficult because there's a lot of moving parts and everything. There's a lot of different hardwares you got to go through, but it is extremely time consuming. Like, just taking the body off, you have to pull off a ton of screws, and then you know, basically to get to anything, you got to remove a whole bunch of stuff. So getting to the motor and doing the motor mesh and stuff isn't too bad. You have to probably remove about 10 screws or whatever, but taking the body off and everything, I mean, there is a lot of stuff in the way. As you can see, this thing just has a lot of working parts. I mean, with the links, several shocks, you know, you got 4 shocks in the rear, you've got 4 shocks up front, these limiting straps, you know, it's just, there's a lot of stuff to move out of the way when you're trying to get to something. So that is going to be kind of a con for me, that you do have to, you know, it is very, very time consuming. Other than that, another pro is this thing's just overall scale look. I know that's not really like something mechanical or whatever, but they went the extra mile with this thing. They've got like mock-up batteries back here, like oil containers. They went ahead and put the remote reservoirs with the cooling on here. You've got your fire extinguishers, 2 spare tires, and they are actual tires. It did have an interior. I took it out to get better airflow to the ESC in here because it's very, very hot where I live. These 2 fans on the back, they're all working. Like, if you blow air in there or whatever, there's actual fans in there that spin. They're not connected to anything. They don't spin on their own, but they do have actual like fan blades in there that spin. So I mean, they really, really, really went the extra mile with this truck as far as making it look the part of what it is, and I appreciate that from Traxxas. They really put a lot into this. Now, you are going to pay for all of that stuff, but we'll get into whether it's worth it or not a little bit later. So one more con I'm going to say is the battery tray. The battery tray tends to be it's not very big. You cannot fit 2 packs in here very easily, and a 4S and 6S pack, especially a 6S pack, you have to run a pretty stubby pack. So, you know, if you're looking for large milliamp hour packs, this thing probably won't be for you because the battery tray is just not set up very well to handle like very big packs. One more con. I'm gonna give this thing one more con. The price. I do think the price is a little high. I mean, this thing coming in at almost $800. That is a pretty penny. It is big. It is powerful. It does have a pretty good electrical system in it, but I mean, closing in on 800 bucks, that is pretty expensive, and you're gonna have a lot of people that are not gonna want to pay that kind of money for something like this. I mean, this is pretty limited in what it can do. I mean, it's amazing what this thing can do with like the smaller tires and stuff. When I crawled on a little bit of rocks and everything, this thing does do very well in several situations, but being almost $800, that is pretty expensive just for a toy in general. So that's gonna get a negative mark from me, but you know, to each their own. Some people might not even blink at paying $800 for something like this, where other people will never ever buy one of these because of how expensive it is. Alrighty, so now that we went over a few pros and cons, I do want to just go ahead and tell you guys what I think of this thing. My experience with this thing, when I got it, I wasn't expecting a whole lot. I basically picked one of these things up because it looked awesome in my local hobby shop, and I figured it would get a few views on the channel, and it would be kind of fun to test. Well, I was wrong about that. It was a blast to test this thing, not just a little bit of fun. I had so much fun driving this thing. Like, well, if you guys watched my first bash video, you know, I sounded like a kid in a candy store, like, oh my god, oh my god. But yeah, I had a blast with this thing, and like I said, I took this thing beyond what I considered reasonable. I expected this thing to break a whole bunch of parts. Like, I figured I was going to be replacing parts on this thing like crazy, and I have only broken one thing to date. Now, what I did break, essentially, I mean, I didn't really break it. It just kind of pulled the screw out of this mount right here. But as you can see, that is not very big. There's not a lot of meat there. So when you pull the screw out, you basically just have to replace your rear axle housing. So this axle housing cost me, the new one that's in here cost me about 20 bucks. But it is relatively difficult to replace that. There's a lot of stuff you got to take apart and take off the truck to get this in there. Now, I do think they should have definitely made this this link mount up here detachable, so it could just be replaced instead of having to replace the whole rear diff housing. But it is cheap, and if you're willing to work on this thing, you can replace that. And since I replaced it, I haven't had a problem. I mean, I did this on what I would consider to be a relatively small thing, but I did come down at an angle and kind of, you know, jar the axle sideways. Or not. Big crash. So, yeah, basically, I love this thing. That is going to be my thoughts on this thing. I do think it's overpriced a little bit. I would like to see this thing, it is 1/7 scale, I would like to see it closer to $700, you know, maybe $650, $700, because you can literally get a St. Colossus for cheaper than this thing. So outside of the price and a few minor flaws, you know, the soft rear diff links, I'm not going to really call that a con because you know, if you're really jumping this thing, it's not designed for that, and that's when you're going to bend those rear links. So that's why I didn't bring that up as a con, because if you keep this thing within its comfort zone, I guess you could call it, or within what it is designed for, I don't believe you'll have a problem with those rear links or like that breakage that I had. But they are soft, and if you do want to go outside of this thing's comfort zone and like really air it out and stuff like I did, you're probably going to have problems with those rear links. The only good thing about it is they're so soft you can just bend it back by hand. So it's, you know, you're going to end up bending it, but you can just bend it back. It is a metal of some kind, you know, but hey, it's not that bad. So all in all, I'm going to give this thing 2 stamps of approval and 2 thumbs up. I think this thing is awesome. I think Traxxas did a very, very, very good job with this thing. Durability wise is excellent. I can't stress that enough. This thing took an actual like beating from me, literally. A lot is to do with that crazy, outrageous like crashes that it tends to do, but it's tough enough to take it. I mean, I didn't break any of the little accessory parts off. I only have 1 breakage on this thing, and it drove away from it. So, I mean, I am very, very happy with this thing. Once again, it is a little overpriced, so to each their own. If you do feel like picking one of these up, I agree with you. I think it's an awesome truck. If you don't ever want to buy one of these things because of the price, I also understand where you're coming from. That it's an expensive truck that is kind of limited in its capabilities, but it is capable of being pushed beyond its boundaries. All right, everybody. Well, I hope that was an informative or entertaining for you. If it was, please hit that thumbs up. If it wasn't and I didn't go over the points you wanted to hear, or you just don't like this video, don't be shy about smashing that thumbs down. Please check out that description. We got raffles going on. You can get Killer Off-Road Hobbies merchandise. Become a patron, help support the channel, and keep cool stuff like this rolling through. And with that, I'll close it out and say, I'm Gary. Thanks for stopping by Killer Off-Road Hobbies, and we'll see you on the next video. Peace.